The lobby of the Bellhaven Grand smelled like fresh coffee and lemon polish, and Renata Voss stood at the front desk with a manila folder pressed flat against her chest like it might slip away from her if she loosened her grip. She'd pressed her blouse twice that morning, ironed the collar until it lay stiff and straight. She wanted to look like someone who belonged behind a desk like this one, not someone who needed the job the way she needed it. "Mr. Kessler will see you now," the young woman at the front desk said, and pointed toward a man crossing the lobby with a kind of walk that said he owned every square foot of marble under his shoes. Walter Kessler didn't slow down when he reached her. He held out his hand, and Renata put the folder into it. "Housekeeping supervisor position," she said. "6 years of experience most recently." "I know what it says." Walter flipped it open without really looking. His eyes caught on something near the bottom of the page, and his jaw shifted. "Ashford Inn." "Yes, sir. You were terminated there. There was a discrepancy in the nightly inventory count." "I was never." "A discrepancy." Walter said the word like it tasted bad. "We had a girl 2 years back, worked the overnight desk. Background check came back clean as a whistle. 3 weeks in, she walked off with half the safe. I don't take chances on flagged files. Not with what's coming for this hotel. Mr. Kessler, if you'd let me explain what actually happened." He tore the resume in half. Not dramatically. Not with any particular anger. He did it the way a man tears a coupon he's decided not to use, folding the 2 halves together before he dropped them onto the reception desk in front of her. The 2 front desk clerks stopped what they were doing. A bellhop wheeling a cart of luggage slowed to watch. Nobody said anything. "I'm not running a charity," Walter said. "I'm running a hotel that's about to get bought out from under me if I don't have my paperwork in order. I can't afford a mistake like this one. Good luck to you." He was already 3 steps away, headed for the elevator bank, when a voice cut across the lobby. "Renata." Renata turned. A woman in her early 30s stood near the concierge desk, a tablet in one hand, mouth slightly open like she'd forgotten how to close it. She wore a Bellhaven Grand badge that read Claire Kessler, VP of Operations. For a second neither of them moved. "Renata Voss," Claire said again, quieter this time, like she was checking the name against something in her memory and finding it matched perfectly. "It's you." "Oh my God, it's really you." Walter stopped at the elevator. "You know her." Claire didn't answer him right away. She was looking at the torn resume on the desk, at the careful block letters of Renata's name still legible across both halves. Renata's bag slipped off her shoulder as she reached down for the torn pages, and something fell out and skittered across the polished floor. A laminated badge, edges worn soft from years of handling. Claire bent and picked it up before Renata could. She turned it over. On the back, in handwriting that belonged to a much younger version of herself, were 4 words. "Thank you for everything." Claire's throat worked. "You kept this." Her fingers traced the worn plastic edge like she was afraid it might dissolve if she pressed too hard. 6 years of dust and pocket lint and careful handling all folded into one small rectangle of laminate. "Claire." Walter's voice had an edge to it now. "Do you know this woman or not?" Renata could have answered for her. Could have said the 6 years out loud. Could have told Walter exactly how his daughter used to fall asleep on a supply closet stool at 2 in the morning during her first internship, and who used to wake her up before a manager caught her. She could have fixed this in about 10 seconds. He didn't. Pride is a strange thing to hold onto when you're standing in a torn-up interview with an eviction notice waiting for you at home, but Renata found herself saying only, "It was a long time ago." Claire looked at her like she wanted to ask 100 questions right there in the lobby. Instead she just nodded slowly, badge still in her hand. One of the front desk clerks, a young man named Oscar who'd only been at the Bellhaven Grand a few months, busied himself refilling a stack of guest folders that didn't need refilling, clearly trying not to be caught staring. He'd seen Walter turn people away before, but never quite like this. Never with an audience, and never with his own daughter freezing mid-step across the lobby. Walter's patience ran out. "I have a call in 10 minutes. Claire, my office now." He walked away. Claire hesitated one more second, looking at Renata, at the torn halves of her resume still sitting on the desk like evidence of something. "Don't leave yet," she said. "Please." Renata picked up the two halves of her resume, fit them back together in her hands, and made a decision that would take her the rest of the week to walk back. She would let this go exactly as far as it needed to go, and not 1 inch further than that. She would not beg. She would not explain herself to people who'd already decided who she was. She stayed anyway. Because 6 days from now her lease was up, and pride doesn't pay rent. She sat down on the edge of a lobby bench, resume halves still in her lap, and watched the ordinary business of the hotel keep moving around her like nothing had happened. A bellhop wheeled a cart past. A couple checked in, laughing about something on their phone. Nobody else in that lobby knew that the last 6 years of her life had just been summarized in the sound of paper tearing. She thought about calling her sister, the way she usually did after a bad interview, just to hear a voice that already knew the whole story and didn't need it explained. She didn't call. There wasn't anything new to say that hadn't already been said 4 or 5 times this year, in 4 or 5 other lobbies that looked almost exactly like this one. Instead, she opened her bag and found the torn halves of the folder her resume had come in, and started, out of habit more than hope, fitting the 2 pieces of paper back together edge to edge, like a puzzle she already knew the picture of. Claire found her 20 minutes later in the break room, sitting stiff-backed in a plastic chair with the 2 halves of her resume laid flat on the table like she was trying to figure out how to tape them back together with dignity and tact. "I owe you an apology for my father," Claire said, sliding into the chair across from her. I don't even know what that was. He's protecting his hotel. I understand that. You don't have to be gracious about it." Claire set the badge down between them. "You kept this 6 years. It mattered to me. It should have mattered more to me. I should have written. I should have called. I got so wrapped up moving up here, taking the VP job, and Claire stopped herself. "That's not the point right now. What happened at Ashford? The real story." Renata looked at the 2 halves of her resume for a long moment. There was a shortfall in the nightly inventory count. Linens, mostly, some small equipment. Whoever did the book said it traced back to my shift logs. I told them it wasn't possible, that I'd been on approved medical leave 3 of those 5 nights. Nobody checked. They terminated me the next morning and flagged the file so no hotel in the network would touch me again. "That's not what happened," Claire said half to herself. "That can't be what happened." "It's exactly what happened. And now it follows me into every interview I get, because HR systems talk to each other whether we want them to or not." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Let me fix this. Let me talk to my father, explain who you are to me." "No." The word came out harder than Renata meant it to. "I don't want a job because the owner's daughter vouched for me at a dinner table. I want the flag corrected because it's wrong, and I want to be hired because I'm qualified, which I am. Those are 2 different things, Claire, and I've spent 6 years explaining that difference to people who don't want to hear it." Claire sat back. "Okay, then let's do it the hard way. But I need to know, how much time do we actually have?" Renata hesitated, then told her about the lease. 6 days until the notice became final. 6 days to either have a job with a paycheck or a plan B she didn't currently have. 6 days, Claire repeated. "Okay. Can work with 6 days. I run operations here, I have access to hiring records. I can at least find out where the flag originated instead of just accepting it exists. That's not charity. That's due diligence. Your father's going to notice you digging around my file. My father is currently on a call with 3 lawyers about a buyout offer he hasn't told the staff about yet. He's not thinking about a torn resume." Claire stood up. "Give me a day. 1 day, and I'll have something concrete, not just an apology." Renata studied her. The same steady focus she remembered from 6 years ago, the girl who used to double-check every number twice because she hated being wrong more than she hated being tired. "1 day," Renata agreed. "But I'm going to keep interviewing elsewhere while you look. I can't afford to put all my hope in one hotel." Renata studied her for a moment, and something in her posture eased just slightly. The first real loosening since she'd walked through the lobby doors that morning. "There's something else you should know before you spend a whole day on this. Ashford Inn isn't independent anymore. They were absorbed into a regional ownership group about 3 years back. If the original personnel file still exists at all, it might be scattered across 2 different record systems now, not one. That complicates things. It complicates things a lot. I tried calling their corporate office myself about a year ago, to see if I could get the flag reviewed. I got transferred 4 times and never got past a voicemail box. Then I'll start with what's still on our end, Claire said. We used to be under the same regional umbrella before my father bought us out independently. There might be overlapping archive records still sitting in this building from before the split. Worth checking before I go chasing Ashford's corporate office. Fair enough. Claire picked up the badge from the table and held it out. You should have this back. Renata closed her hand around it. I never really let go of it. Claire walked her out through the staff corridor instead of the main lobby, past a wall of framed photographs documenting decades of the Bellhaven Grand. Grand openings, anniversary parties, a black and white shot of the original owner cutting a ribbon sometime in the 1950s. Renata paused in front of it without quite meaning to. My grandfather, Claire said, started this place with 4 rooms and a diner attached. My dad spent his whole life trying to live up to that photograph. I think that's part of why he panics the way he does when something threatens the hotel. It's not really about the money for him. It's about not being the generation that loses it. That doesn't make what he did to me this morning right. No, Claire agreed. It doesn't. I'm not defending him. I'm just telling you why he is the way he is, because you're going to need to understand him a little if we're going to get him to listen. At the staff exit, Claire stopped and looked at her one more time, like she still couldn't quite believe the coincidence of it. 6 years, a torn résumé, a badge falling out of a bag at exactly the right moment. One day, she said again. I promise you, one real day. Renata nodded and stepped out into the parking lot, into an afternoon that felt exactly as uncertain as it had that morning. Except now, for the first time in longer than she wanted to admit, someone else was carrying part of the weight with her. Priya Chandran had run HR at the Bellhaven Grand for 9 years, and in that time she had learned exactly one unbreakable rule. Never override a system flag without paperwork that could survive an audit. I can pull the file, she told Claire, but I need you to understand something. If there's nothing in writing that contradicts the flag, I can't clear it. Not because I don't believe you. Because if the buyout committee ever looks at our hiring practices and finds a manager overriding background checks on personal say-so, that's a liability nightmare for everyone, including your father. I'm not asking you to override anything, Claire said. I'm asking you to look at why it's there in the first place. Priya pulled up the shared industry database on her monitor and typed in Renata's name. The flag appeared instantly. Terminated for cause. Inventory discrepancy. Ashford Inn 6 years prior. No further detail. No case number. No supervisor sign-off attached. That's strange, Priya said, frowning. Usually there's a termination report linked. This one's just the flag itself. No backup documentation. Can you request the original file from Ashford? I can try. They're part of the same regional network we used to be under before the ownership split, so the records should technically still exist somewhere. But Ashford's not going to prioritize digging up a 6-year-old personnel file for a hotel that isn't even under their umbrella anymore. Priya sat back. This could take days, Claire, and even then I might get nothing more than what's already here. Then I'll go digging myself. We still have overlapping records from before the split, don't we? Old archive boxes. Claire was already pulling up the building's storage inventory on her tablet as she said it, scrolling through a list of sub-basement shelving codes that hadn't been touched in years. In the sub-basement storage room. Nobody's touched those in years. Priya glanced at her. Can I ask why this matters so much to you? You've got 40 other things on your plate this week. Claire thought about the badge, the handwritten note on the back of it that she hadn't looked at in years and had somehow still remembered word for word. She mattered to me once, and I let that slide for a long time. I'd like to not let it slide anymore. Down the hall, Dennis Praley stood outside his office with a coffee going cold in his hand, close enough to catch the tail end of the conversation through the open HR door. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he turned and walked the other way, phone already coming out of his pocket. That evening, Renata worked a shift at a staffing agency, filling in as a banquet server at a wedding 3 towns over, carrying trays of champagne flutes with the same careful precision she'd have used behind a hotel desk. It wasn't the work she wanted. It paid, barely, and it reminded her that competence without a clean record was worth exactly what someone was willing to pay for an evening of it. She checked her phone between courses. A message from Claire. Priya's checking Ashford's old records. Might take a few days. Don't lose hope yet. Renata typed back. I'm not losing hope. I'm losing time. 6 days, remember. There was no reply for almost an hour. When it came, it was short, I remember. I won't let this drop. Renata put the phone away and picked up another tray. The mistaken belief she'd carried into this whole thing, that being right would eventually be enough on its own, was already starting to feel thinner than it had that morning. Near the end of the wedding, an older guest at the edge of the reception stopped her as she cleared glasses off a side table. You've got a steady hand, the woman said. You worked hotels before this. 6 years, Renata said, then caught herself before adding anything else. It wasn't this stranger's business what had happened to those 6 years, or why she was carrying champagne trays instead of running a housekeeping floor tonight. Well, whoever's not hiring you is missing out, the woman said, and moved on toward the dance floor before Renata could answer. Renata carried that sentence with her the whole drive home, turning it over the way you turn over a coin looking for which side is heads. It didn't fix anything. It didn't clear a flag or pay a lease. But it was the first time in a long while someone had looked at her doing the actual work, instead of reading a line on a form, and reached a conclusion about who she was. She fell asleep that night with her phone on the pillow beside her, waiting for a message that didn't come until well past midnight, and even then it was only 3 words. Still looking. Don't worry. She read it twice before she let herself believe it. The sub-basement archive room hadn't been organized in a decade. Boxes were labeled by year in marker that had faded to almost nothing, stacked on metal shelving that groaned every time Claire pulled one loose. She told her father she was doing an inventory audit for the buyout committee, which was even technically true if you squinted. It took her 2 nights after her regular shift ended, sorting through payroll printouts and old time clock logs with a flashlight propped against a shelf because the overhead bulb had burned out months ago and nobody had bothered to replace it. On the second night she found it. A time clock summary sheet from Ashford Inn, 6 years old, water-stained at one corner but still legible. 3 of the 5 nights listed in Renata's termination flag were marked with a code Claire didn't immediately recognize. She photographed the page and texted it to a former colleague who still worked payroll systems at the old regional office. The reply came back within the hour. That code's approved medical leave. She wasn't even clocked in those nights. Claire sat down on an overturned crate in the dim archive room and read the message twice. She was on leave. The nights the shortfall was traced to. Renata wasn't even in the building. It didn't prove who had taken the inventory. It didn't prove anything about who was actually responsible. But it proved, cleanly and on paper, that the story used to fire Renata could not have been true the way it was written. Claire called her the next morning before her shift. I found something, she said, and read her the message. There was a long silence on the line. Say that again, Renata said. You were on approved medical leave 3 of the 5 nights they blamed you for. It's right here, Renata. In writing. It's not your word against theirs anymore. Renata had to sit down on the edge of her bed. 6 years of carrying a story nobody believed. And here it was, finally, something with a date and a signature that backed her up. This doesn't clear the flag by itself, Claire said carefully. Priya still needs something that shows who actually caused the shortfall, not just who didn't. But it's a start. It's a real start. Who would even have access to falsify something like that 6 years ago? I don't know yet. But somebody signed off on that termination without ever checking the time clock records. And I want to know why. Renata looked at the badge sitting on her nightstand, the handwritten note facing up. 6 years I told myself this would never get fixed. That I just have to build a life around the flag instead of past it. You're not building around it anymore, Claire said. We're going after the source. Renata hung up the phone and sat for a moment in the quiet of her apartment, looking at the eviction notice still taped to her refrigerator where she'd put it as a reminder, not a threat. 2 days left on the clock now, and for the first time since Monday, the number didn't feel quite as heavy sitting on her chest. She thought about calling her landlord, asking for even a few more days of grace given how close things were to resolving. She decided against it. Better to let the facts finish speaking before she asked anyone for patience based on a story still half told. It was the first time since the lobby that Renata let herself believe the plan might actually work. She didn't know yet that believing it would cost her something before it paid off. She spent that evening doing something she hadn't let herself do in years. She pulled out an old cardboard box from the back of her closet, the one with every pay stub, every schedule printout, every scrap of paper from her time at Ashford that she'd never had the heart to throw away, even after they stopped meaning anything. She laid them out across her bed, dates lined up in order, trying to remember the exact sequence of that final week, the way you try to remember the layout of a house you haven't lived in for years. 3 nights on leave. 2 nights working. A short conversation with a manager on a Thursday that she'd never once been able to explain to anyone's satisfaction, because at the time she hadn't understood what was actually being asked of her, only that something in the tone of the questions had felt wrong. She photographed her own scattered pages and sent them to Claire the next morning, not because she thought they'd prove anything on their own, but because for 6 years she'd been the only person holding this story, and it felt different, lighter somehow, to finally hand pieces of it to someone else. Priya cross-referenced the leave record against the original inventory reconciliation sheets from that same week, box by box, until she found the one that mattered. A handwritten count sheet with a signature at the bottom that made her stop scrolling. "Claire," she said, turning her monitor around. "You need to see this." The reconciliation numbers on the sheet didn't match the numbers used to justify Renata's termination. Someone had recorded one inventory count during the shift, then submitted a different, lower count to management 3 days later, after Renata had already been let go. The handwriting on both versions was the same. Dennis Praley's signature was at the bottom of the second sheet. Claire stared at it for a long moment. "He was operations director at Ashford before he came here with my father. I never put that together. There's no way to know for certain what happened just from this," Priya said, careful the way HR people are trained to be careful. "But it shows 2 different counts submitted for the same period, signed by the same person, with the second one used to justify a termination for someone who wasn't even clocked in for most of it." "That's enough to ask him a real question," Claire said. Everything shifted for her in that moment, and she felt it happen almost physically, a tightening in her chest. This wasn't a favor for an old friend anymore. If Dennis had falsified those numbers to cover a shortfall of his own, and there was no other explanation that made sense of 2 conflicting counts in his own handwriting, then the man running operations at her father's hotel, the man overseeing the exact financial audits that would determine whether the buyout went through clean, had a 6-year-old cover-up sitting under everything. She thought about her father, exhausted and short-tempered from buyout meetings, trusting Dennis completely because Dennis had been with him for over a decade. She thought about what it would do to her father if this became public in the middle of an active sale. "This isn't just about clearing Renata's name anymore," she said quietly. "If he did this once and got away with it, what else has he adjusted along the way?" Priya didn't answer that. She didn't need to. Claire called Renata that evening and told her everything, watching her own hand shake slightly as she scrolled back through the photos of both reconciliation sheets. "So it wasn't a mistake," Renata said slowly. "Somebody did this on purpose, and it wasn't me." "I think so. I can't prove intent yet. But the numbers don't lie, and neither does a signature. What happens now?" Claire looked at the photos again. "Now I stop trying to fix this quietly. I go to Priya properly on the record, and we build something that can actually stand up if Dennis pushes back. Which he will." Renata was quiet for a moment. "You understand what you're risking. He works for your father. You'd be accusing your father's most trusted operations director of falsifying records, in the middle of a sale." "I understand exactly what I'm risking," Claire said. I'm doing it anyway. 2 days later, Priya called Claire into her office and closed the door, which was never a good sign. Dennis asked me for access to the archive logs this morning, Priya said. Said he wanted to review old records ahead of the audit. Standard housekeeping on his end. I told him I'd need a written request first per policy, since those boxes technically fall under a records hold now. Did he push back? He didn't love it. Said something about not wanting to slow down audit prep with unnecessary red tape. I stalled him as long as I reasonably could without it looking suspicious. Priya folded her hands on the desk. Claire, if he's trying to get into that archive room, it's not for audit prep. He knows something's being looked at. Claire felt her stomach drop slightly. How much time do you think we have? Honestly, not much. If I were him and I knew somebody was pulling 6-year-old reconciliation sheets with my signature on them, I wouldn't wait around either. Then we move faster than we planned. She hung up the phone and sat alone in her apartment for a while, looking at the 2 reconciliation sheets side by side on her laptop screen until the numbers blurred slightly from staring. She thought about the man who'd taught her how to read a balance sheet when she was 22 years old, patient in a way her own father rarely had time to be, walking her through spreadsheets after her shift ended because he said a good operations person needed to understand the numbers, not just trust them. It didn't feel like betrayal exactly, going after Dennis. It felt more like grief for a version of him she wasn't sure had ever really existed, or if it hadn't existed anymore for a long time. She printed both sheets and slid them into a folder along with Priya's notes, then sat with the folder closed on her kitchen table for almost 20 minutes before she could make herself stand up and go to bed. Tomorrow she would have to decide how far this went, and some part of her already suspected the answer was going to cost more than either she or Renata had first assumed. Dennis noticed the archive room's overhead light had been replaced. He noticed Priya's office door staying closed longer than usual. He noticed Claire avoiding his eyes at the Tuesday operations meeting, and by Wednesday morning he was standing in her office with the door shut behind him. I hear you and Priya have been pulling old Ashford files, he said, voice pleasant, posture relaxed in a way that didn't match the tightness around his eyes. Anything I should know about? Just cleaning up some hiring record inconsistencies, Claire said. Standard stuff ahead of the audit. Because if there's a problem with how something was handled 6 years ago, at a hotel neither of us technically works for anymore, I'd want to be looped in. I was operations director there too, you know. Might save you some digging. Claire held his gaze. I appreciate that. I'll let you know if I need anything. Dennis's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. Careful going through old files without full context, Claire. Numbers from 6 years ago can look strange without the whole picture. Wouldn't want anyone jumping to a conclusion that embarrasses the hotel right before a sale. It wasn't a threat exactly. It was close enough to one that Claire felt it land the way it was meant to. Later that night, working late in the records office, Priya noticed the archive room's access log showed an entry after hours. A keycard swipe at 11:47 p.m., logged under Dennis's credentials, 32 minutes after the building's official closing time. She screenshotted the log entry before it could be edited or explained away and sent it straight to Claire's phone with a single line. He was in there last night. After hours. Alone. Claire stared at the message for a long time before she typed back. Did he take anything? Can you tell? Priya's reply came a few minutes later. Box 6 is out of order on the shelf. Everything else is exactly where it was. Box 6 is the one with the reconciliation sheets. Claire sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. If Dennis had gotten to the sheets before they could formally document and copy them, the whole case could collapse into nothing more than a disagreement about old paperwork nobody could produce. That afternoon, her father called her into his office. He looked more tired than she'd seen him in months, buyout documents spread across his desk in overlapping stacks. Dennis mentioned you're pulling old personnel files, Walter said. Is there a problem I should know about? There might be, Dad. It's about the maid you turned away Monday. Renata. Walter's face closed slightly. The one with the flagged file. The flag might be wrong. I found evidence she was on approved leave for the nights she was blamed for. And the numbers used against her don't match the original count. Someone altered them after the fact. Who signed the altered version? Claire hesitated for half a second too long. It's not confirmed yet. Claire. Her father's voice had the flat, careful tone he used when he was trying not to lose his temper in front of buyout lawyers. We are 2 weeks from closing the most important sale of this hotel's history. I cannot have you stirring up a 6-year-old personnel dispute from a property we don't even own anymore. Whatever this is, let it go until after the sale. And if it turns out our current operations director falsified records to cover a shortfall he caused? Walter's expression flickered, just slightly. Then we deal with it after the sale, quietly, through proper channels. Not in the middle of due diligence. Do you understand what happens to a deal like this if a scandal surfaces during the audit? People lose jobs, Claire. All of them. Not just Dennis's. Claire left his office feeling something crack that hadn't cracked before. Not her belief that she was doing the right thing, but her certainty that her father would automatically be on her side. That night she sat with Renata in a diner near the agency where Renata had picked up another banquet shift. Both of them too tired to pretend the day had gone well. He told me to let it go, Claire said. My own father. Maybe he's right to be scared, Renata said quietly. You could lose your position over this. I don't want that on top of everything else. You lost your whole career over a lie somebody else told about you. And you're worried about my job? I'm worried about both things being true at once, Renata said. That's allowed. Claire looked down at her coffee for a long moment. I almost backed off today. In his office for about 10 seconds, I almost told him okay, I'll drop it. What stopped you? Claire thought of the badge, worn soft at the corners. 4 handwritten words on the back that had waited 6 years to be repaid properly. You never once asked me to owe you anything. Not 6 years ago, not now. I think that's exactly why I can't stop. They sat in the diner a while longer, past the point where either of them had anything left in their coffee cups. Just 2 people who'd both had rougher weeks than they were used to admitting out loud. Can I ask you something? Renata said eventually. Why housekeeping? You could have done anything, Claire. Business school, corporate track, anything. Why did you spend your first internship mopping floors at 2 in the morning? Claire smiled for the first time all evening. Because you told me that if I wanted to run a hotel someday, I had to understand what it actually took to keep one clean and running, not just what it looked like from an office. You said management that's never scrubbed a bathtub at 3 a.m. doesn't respect the people who have to. I remember saying that. I've never forgotten it. It's basically the only leadership philosophy I actually believe in. Renata looked down at her coffee cup, throat tight in a way she hadn't expected. I didn't think anyone was listening back then. I was just trying to get through my shift. I was listening, Claire said. I've been listening this whole time. I just took a long time to do anything about it. Marcus Webb had worked night maintenance at Ashford 6 years ago, and he'd been at the Bellhaven Grand for the last 4, one of the few people who'd made the jump between properties when the ownership split happened. Claire found him in the boiler room, fixing a valve that had been rattling since the previous winter. I need to ask you about something from a long time ago, she said. Ashford Inn, the week Renata Voss was terminated. Marcus's hands stilled on the wrench. That's a long time back. I know. I also know you might remember more than you've ever said out loud. He was quiet for a while, working the valve loose, buying himself time. I saw Dennis in the storeroom that night. Late after his shift should have ended. Recounting inventory by himself, no one else present, which wasn't how we did counts. Supposed to be 2 people always. I didn't think much of it at the time. Wasn't my business. Would you be willing to say that in writing? Marcus set the wrench down slowly. Dennis is still my boss's boss. You understand what you're asking me to risk? I do. I'm risking something too. So is Renata, more than either of us. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. Give me the form. I'll sign it. That evening, Claire laid everything out on her kitchen table. The archived time clock log, the 2 mismatched reconciliation sheets, and now Marcus's signed statement. 3 pieces, each one useless without the others, together forming something that couldn't be easily waved away. Renata sat across from her, looking at all of it. "There's another option," Renata said finally. "Your father could quietly correct the flag on my file alone. No public process, no confrontation with Dennis. I get my name cleared, you keep the piece at home. Nobody has to blow up right before the sale. Is that what you want?" Before Renata could answer, Claire's phone buzzed with a message from Priya. Confirmation that Box 6 had been tampered with, but that the original reconciliation sheets had already been photographed and logged into the HR system 2 days earlier, before Dennis ever got near them. Whatever he'd removed or altered in the physical box no longer mattered. The record existed elsewhere now, time-stamped and backed up, completely outside his reach. Claire read the message twice and turned her phone around so Renata could see it. "He tried to make the evidence disappear. Didn't work. Priya digitized everything before he ever got the chance. That's not going to make this easier with your father," Renata said. "If anything, it makes it worse. Now there's proof he was actively covering his tracks this week, not just 6 years ago." "I know," Claire said. "That's exactly why we can't let this stay quiet anymore." Renata thought about it for a long moment. The eviction notice at home, the 6 days now down to 2, the exhaustion of carrying a fight this heavy for this long. It would have been so easy to take the quiet fix and walk away with her life stitched back together. "No," she said. "If it stays quiet, Dennis keeps his job, keeps his authority, and probably does this to somebody else eventually. Somebody who doesn't happen to know your daughter. I don't want a favor. I want the record corrected the right way, in writing, with his name on what he actually did. Even if that's harder for everyone, including you." Claire looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we do it the hard way. All the way through. Your father's going to have to choose a side." "I know." Claire gathered the papers into a folder. "I'm going to make him choose tomorrow before the audit team arrives. Not after." Walter's office felt smaller than usual with 4 people standing in it. Walter behind his desk, Dennis by the window with his arms crossed, Claire and Renata on the other side of the desk, a folder between them. "You said you wanted to talk about the audit prep," Walter said to Claire, glancing between the folder and Dennis's face. "This doesn't look like audit prep." "It's related," Claire said. She opened the folder and laid the 3 documents across the desk, one at a time. This is the original time clock log from Ashford Inn, showing Renata was on approved medical leave for 3 of the 5 nights she was blamed for a shortfall. This is the original inventory reconciliation sheet, and this is the revised version submitted 3 days after she was fired, with different numbers, same handwriting, same signature. Walter picked up the 2 reconciliation sheets and looked between them slowly. His jaw tightened as he read. "That's my handwriting from a stressful week, nothing more," Dennis said, voice even. "Counts get revised all the time when discrepancies are found. That's not evidence of anything. Then explain why the revised count happens to match exactly the shortfall used to terminate someone who wasn't even in the building for most of the period in question," Claire said. "I don't have to explain 6-year-old paperwork to you." "You do to me," Walter said quietly, still looking at the sheets. The 3rd document was Marcus's statement. Claire slid it across last. Dennis read the first line and went very still. "Marcus recalls you doing an inventory count alone that night," Claire said, "which wasn't standard procedure. Alone late, after your shift had technically ended. He's misremembering. It was 6 years ago." "Then it's strange," Renata said, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the room, "that his memory lines up exactly with a set of numbers that only exist because someone changed them after I was already gone and couldn't defend myself." Dennis's composure slipped for the first time. A flash of something harder underneath the pleasant manager's voice he'd used the whole conversation. "You don't know what it was like managing that property. Corporate breathing down my neck over a shortfall. My job on the line if I couldn't account for it. I found a discrepancy, I fixed the numbers so they'd balance, and yes, her file got flagged because her name was on the shift roster that week. I didn't think it would follow her this far. I didn't think about it at all, honestly, once it was done. You went into the archive room after hours 2 nights ago, Claire added quietly. The access log has your keycard at 11:47. Box 6 was disturbed the next morning. I think you were trying to remove exactly these 2 sheets before anyone else could see them side by side. Dennis's jaw tightened. For the first time since they'd walked into the office, he didn't have an immediate answer ready. I was checking old files for the audit, he said finally, but the pleasant, even tone from earlier had thinned out considerably. That's allowed. I have every right to review archive material. At midnight alone, the same week my daughter starts asking about a 6-year-old termination you signed off on? Walter's voice had gone very quiet, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. Dennis, I have known you for 11 years. I brought you with me when I split off from the regional group. I trusted you with numbers I never double-checked myself, because I never had a reason to. Walter, I can explain the timeline if you'll just let me. You've had 2 explanations already, Walter said. One for the sheets, one for the archive room. I don't think a third one is going to help you. The room went quiet. Walter set the sheets down slowly on his desk and looked at Dennis for a long moment, a decade of trust folding in on itself in real time. You let an innocent woman carry a false termination for 6 years, Walter said, to protect your own numbers, and you never once thought to correct it. I made a mistake under pressure, Walter. One mistake a long time ago. You made a choice, Walter said. And then you made it again this week, when my daughter started asking questions, and you tried to talk her out of looking any further. He looked at Claire. You told me it wasn't confirmed yet. I didn't want to accuse him without proof in front of you, Claire said. I have it now. Walter walked to the window, and stood there for a long moment with his back to the room. When he turned around, he looked at Dennis first. You're terminated, effective today. I'll be forwarding everything in this folder to the audit team myself, because if I don't and they find it independently, it looks 100 times worse for this hotel than it does if I disclose it now. Walter, think about what this does to the sale. I am thinking about the sale, Walter said. I'm thinking about what it does to me to sell this hotel on numbers I can't trust, built by a man who falsified records once already. He looked at Renata. I owe you an apology. A real one, not the kind I gave you in the lobby. I'd rather have the flag corrected properly than an apology, Renata said. Written on record, with the actual reason for my termination replaced with the truth. You'll have it by end of day, Walter said. And the housekeeping supervisor position is yours if you still want it, on your qualifications, not as a favor to my daughter. Renata looked at Claire, then back at Walter. I want it because I'm good at the job. That's the only reason I'll take it. Walter looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his tired eyes. Ashford's flag cost this hotel a good hire once already, and I nearly let it cost us a second time out of nothing but habit. That's on me too, not just Dennis. You didn't falsify anything, Mr. Kessler, Renata said. You just trusted a system that had already been broken by someone else. Those aren't the same failure. They're close enough that I'm going to change how we screen these files from now on. 2 sign-offs required on any termination flag before it follows someone to their next job. Priya's already drafting it. Walter looked down at the 3 documents still spread across his desk, the weight of 6 years finally sitting in the open instead of buried in a drawer somewhere. I'll have HR process your onboarding paperwork this afternoon. Welcome to the Bellhaven Grand, Ms. Voss. 2 weeks later, the audit closed without the scandal Walter had feared. Disclosing the falsified record himself before the buyers found it turned out to matter more to the deal than the falsification itself had threatened to. The sale went through with new hiring review procedures written into the transition plan, procedures Priya had insisted on personally. The buyout committee's lead attorney told Walter, almost offhand, that hotels which self-reported problems during due diligence tended to close cleaner than ones that got caught hiding them. Walter hadn't done it for that reason. But he didn't correct the assumption either, and Claire noticed weeks later that he'd started mentioning the new two-signature policy to anyone who'd listen, as if it had always been his idea to begin with. Marcus got a small bump in his maintenance role not long after, nothing dramatic, just a supervisor title and a raise that had apparently been overdue for a while and finally got approved. Nobody said it was connected to his statement. Nobody needed to. Dennis didn't face criminal charges. The statute on the original inventory discrepancy had long since passed, but his termination followed him into every reference check he'd ever need again, the same way Renata's flag had followed her. Renata stood behind the front desk of the Bellhaven Grand on her first morning as housekeeping supervisor, training a new hire on the overnight inventory procedure. 2 people counting together, always, every single time, no exceptions. "Why 2 people?" the new hire asked. "Seems like overkill for towels and soap." "Because one person's word, even an honest one, isn't always enough to protect them," Renata said. 2 signatures make it harder for anyone to rewrite the story later. At the end of her shift, Claire found her at the desk, a small frame in her hands. Inside it was the laminated badge, properly restored, the handwritten note on the back visible through the glass. "I had it mounted," Claire said. "Figured it's been through enough loose in the bottom of a bag." Renata took it, ran her thumb along the frame's edge. Beside it, hanging from a new lanyard, was her own current staff badge. Her name spelled correctly, no flag attached to it anywhere in the system now, nothing but 6 years finally set right. "How's the new policy working out?" Renata asked. 2 sign-offs on every flag. "Priya says it's already caught one mistake at our sister property across town. A dishwasher who got flagged over a cash drawer count that turned out to be a register error, not theft. They found it in about a day instead of 6 years. Small mercy," Renata said. "But a real one. Dad's actually proud of that part, weirdly. Doesn't like to talk about how it started, but he brings up the new hiring review process every chance he gets, like it was his idea all along." Renata almost laughed. "Let him have that one. He did sign the memo." "He did," Claire agreed. Reluctantly. "But he signed it." Renata looked out across the lobby, the same marble floor she'd stood on that first morning with a folder pressed against her chest like it might slip away from her. It hadn't slipped away. It had just taken the long way around to landing exactly where it belonged. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm glad it was you who recognized me that day. Not because of the help. Because I'd have hated for you to walk right past me and never know." "I could never have walked past you," Claire said. "Not after everything you gave me before I even knew how to say thank you properly." "Thank you for everything," Renata read quietly off the old badge. "You already thanked me once. A long time ago. I don't think I ever really believed you'd let me thank you again," Claire said. Renata set the framed badge on the desk beside her new one. 2 names, 2 versions of the same relationship, side by side under the lobby lights. "You believe it now." She turned back to her new hire, waiting patiently a few feet away, and picked up the inventory clipboard. "All right," Renata said. "Let's count it together. Both of us, every time." The new hire, a young woman named Talia who reminded Renata a little of Claire at that age, counted linens off the shelf while Renata checked each number against the sheet, calling totals back and forth between them until every column matched clean. "Feels slow," Talia admitted. "Doing it this way. Would go faster solo." "It would," Renata agreed. "But slow and accurate beats fast and disputable every time. Trust me on that one particular thing. I learned it the hard way, and I'd rather you learn it the easy way from me instead." Talia didn't ask what she meant by that, and Renata didn't offer the whole story. Some of it belonged only to her, and to the badge sitting framed on the desk a few feet away, catching the morning light coming through the lobby windows. Proof, finally, of exactly what it had always claimed to be true. If this story hit home for you, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment telling us what you'd have done in Renata's shoes. Share this one with someone who needs a reminder that the truth is worth fighting for, even when it's the long way around. See you in the next story.